Well, I'll start with a story of 2 years ago when I started my PhD and I was in the city of Oxford for an induction. I think I have never felt so lost in my life. The induction was not only about the academic part of the PhD, but also to understand the library system. And that was a whole new experience for me. I mean, the city I come from, we have one library and that's it. But being in Oxford and having to learn actually how to use my library card and what that means and how many books and how many days and how to get into the web page and we had to get a class for that. And then we also were taken to the different libraries in which we could take books from. And at a point, I wanted to take my bike to one of those tours, but was told that I couldn't because there would be so many people walking around and there would be no place to leave my bike or to walk with my bike in the whole group. I left the bike in our school, and when it was time to get back, I was very lost and had no idea how to get back to the school and had no SIM card from the UK and suddenly wanted to cry. And yes, it sounds like a very desperate situation, but what I want to stress here is that higher education and postgraduate studies, but just higher education in general, sometimes feels like a whole different experience than any other we have done. It has its own language, rules, things that we have to learn that we have no idea how to use or how to do, and things are not obvious. You actually do need inductions. And you learn by watching, you learn by listening to advice, you learn just by observing what others do, where they eat, how they order, etc. And sometimes you learn by also getting lost and trying to find your way.
You're listening to Academicus, and today we're diving into that moment when you start to finally understand the game rules as you enter university or even dive deeper into academic life. So go ahead and follow us on your favorite streaming platform and send this episode to that friend of yours who's right there with you in the journey of being a student, a researcher, or a professor.
Those of us who are first-generation college students know what it's like to not have someone nearby to answer questions, to give tips, or even understand the crisis that comes up. This has also become an issue for the generations who spent much of their undergraduate or graduate studies online because of the pandemic. It's a format with many advantages, but it has its drawbacks too. One of those drawbacks is the lack of places where we can see how others are navigating things. Get a good reading suggestion, finding out what the professor tends to focus on, and so on. And in this process, having the support of some students who are more experimented than you are is essential. It was essential for me. Hearing stories of how it was for others in each stage, which semester or term was the hardest, even knowing how the defense of their thesis was and what was their strategy to actually make the best out of this very hard season made a huge difference for me when I was able to ask others who had already walked that path. However, there is also a lot we hear that can shape our academic culture in a more dangerous way. Such is the culture of normalizing abuse. Oh, academy is just like that, you hear. It's pure suffering. Or like, in your last year of college, just give up. You won't have the time to see your friends and family. This can also be seen in souvenirs given to professors. Like those mugs that say, "These are the tears of my students." Yeah, super funny. Wow. I really don't get it. And it's echoed in the number of memes shared on academic pages that reinforce the suffering in university life, especially in grad school and the academy. There are many great pages where we can follow researchers' routines and get a ton of inspiration. We will leave a list of suggestions on the episode's website. But then there are others that, oh my, for God's sake, I call them damned memes. These memes reinforce bad habits in our behavior under the guise of conformity. An example is a meme that says that the biggest motivation for undergrad is desperation, with productivity graphs showing the productivity curve only rising when a deadline or exam is near, or the one with Fred from Scooby-Doo pulling off the PhD mask to reveal that PhD actually means isolation, conflicts with advisors, no balance between study and personal life, anxiety and stress. Or another meme saying that the real superpower of an academic is procrastinating until the last minute, pulling an all-nighter with 3 energy drinks. Jokes and more jokes that normalize toxic behaviors between professors and students and among colleagues. After all, what's the point of stuffing our brains with information at the cost of our mental health and character? University is a place that can foster human flourishing in many ways, and promoting a culture full of bad habits can lead to high publication rates, as well as high levels of burnout, depression, and anxiety. That's because burnout was only classified as a work-related illness by the World Health Organization in 2022. It's at best problematic to have such an incredible process of discovery, wonder, and learning so disconnected from a healthy way of life. I'm not saying it's the easiest career to pursue, but does it have to be this way? Do we need to enter this field with our minds conditioned to accept this as the norm? Do we need to start our research with a mindset that just accepts the injustices and abuse that come along? I know that I'm asking a lot of questions here, but when we enter academic life and learn a bit about scientific production, the first thing we learn to do is ask questions, right? To raise hypotheses. And the hypothesis here is, should we really have normalized this kind of suffering in this way? And just a quick side note. We're not suggesting here that we need to be zen all the time and never suffer in any way. Suffering is a negative in itself. If we didn't feel pain, we'd hurt ourselves all the time. If we didn't feel bad for something, we wouldn't have empathy. What I'm talking about is suffering that should not be normalized, suffering that comes from abuse or neglect. Not the anguish of curiosity that makes us want to grow as researchers, or the discomfort of facing a harsh answer that helps us mature, or the pressure that makes us understand the importance of something. I'm talking about the suffering that attacks human dignity, but we will revisit this topic in the final episode. So, who's benefiting from this culture of, yes, if you want to do research or pursue academic life, you have to accept that you're going to suffer? Now, you'll hear from Luana Sofiati on the voice of Ariana Montiel. She holds a master's in literature from the Federal University of Jules de Fora. She has mentored over 90 students through her research and writing process.
When we normalize the idea that academy is an inherently hostile environment, we're also normalizing a direct association between suffering and learning. This is a really negative perspective. We are normalizing a meritocratic mindset. We are normalizing authoritarianism between professors and students. We are also perpetuating the idea that university is only a place for a selected kind of people. I believe it's valid to talk about the issues that we have to face on our educational journey. But in order to do this, we need to create a more welcoming academic culture. This conversation must talk about the problems within critical and questioning perspective, and not one of conformity or self-deprecating jokes.
Another example of who benefits from this culture: businesses that sell academic papers and final projects. Yes. Whether it's a final paper, a thesis, or a dissertation, I won't mention names so as not to give them free publicity, but I'm sure many of us have seen ads like that on social media or around the campus. Then there are those AI chat tools that are also part of the market, aiming to profit off people searching for a miraculous solution. Sometimes they're not even trying to sell the text itself, but knowing that many of the crises we experience in university life end up in writing, there are plenty of people out there offering miracle solutions for producing research for publication. even creating data, or for completing a final project in just a week. You name it. What fuels this market is precisely the desperation of those who have no idea how to meet an evaluative requirement. And the coaches know this, using mental triggers to sell their services. It's common to find someone struggling with the advisor-student process. And this happens for a variety of reasons. The more we talk to people, the more we realize that the challenges are on both sides, actually. I'm sure you've heard a story about a bad advisor, probably just as often as you have had stories about a classmate who did nothing on a group project but still got the credit, right? Exactly. And when I talked to Luana about this topic, she brought up an important point about advising. You will hear Ariana here again.
In my work, when I was supporting researchers in graduate programs, the most common complaint I'd heard about the advisors was their lack of dialogue. I've noticed that some of these conflicts in their working relationships began from a lack of clarity about their roles and their responsibilities. This lack of communication showed up when the advisor didn't want to read a chapter that was not completed. I do understand it is difficult and challenging for any person to read a chapter that is not completed. This might make the students feel lost and abandoned because they cannot share partial results. I will give you 3 examples of conflicts that might arise from the lack of clarity about the responsibilities of the advisors. One of them is to expect the advisor to schedule the meetings, or to set the writing timeline and even shape the argumentative structure of the chapters. We know that different advising dynamics exist. And all of these actions I mentioned are the responsibilities of the researcher. The advisor is responsible for responding to your meeting requests, but you can and you should speak up when you need support. The advisor should be open to discuss your schedule and ideas for the chapter, but it is in your responsibility to take the initiative and present the advisor the ideas that you want to put in your paper.
But what do people actually understand by advising? You are listening to Beatriz Castro and Christine Journes Hansen's voice.
At my university, most undergraduate research here is based on a unified scholarship program.
Beatriz is a pedagogy student at USP Ribeiro Preto.
The student joins a project that a professor has already written, so our relationship as students is very dependent on what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. So that was the case for me in both of my experiences and for some of my peers too. So while it was great and helped me develop many skills, now, working on my final paper, I'm truly learning about autonomy and the advisor's role. So this shift in understanding hasn't been simple, because before it felt like I was working for the professor, since it wasn't a project I designed myself. That affected my organization, my deadlines, my emotional state, and my relationship with my advisor. Now I feel my responsibility is to the research itself, which also has its impact, but I feel less tension in the advisor-student relationship.
Sadie Leon, a master's student at PUC, shared a bit about her experience in Peru. Listen to her in Marcela Marcos' voice.
Generalmente se necesita suerte para tener un buen
Usually,
asesor.
you need luck to get a good advisor. Sometimes, you have the freedom to choose. Other times, there are no options, and you know the relationship with that person won't be easy. In the worst cases, this delays your progress and it becomes a frustrating experience. On the other hand, in undergraduate programs, during the final cycle, there is often a course on how to write a thesis or a final project that should be well utilized, but not everyone takes full advantage of it. I'm not sure if students are aware that thesis advisors don't receive financial compensation for their guidance. Perhaps that's why some do the job willingly, although this is certainly not the case for everyone. In Peruvian culture, there are significant communication issues, especially in the relationship between students and thesis advisors. I frequently hear stories of experiences marked by high levels of stress and anxiety due to the delays in receiving feedback on research work. It is understandable that, in many cases, professors are overwhelmed with responsibilities. But the students need to understand their advisor's current situation to prepare accordingly, and vice versa. Unfortunately, we are not used to direct communication. Instead, we often rely on assumptions.
As for Chile, Esteban Muñoz, our Spanish language podcast host and a law graduate from University of Valparaíso, adds another perspective.
Yo creo que esto pasa mucho.
You will hear the voice of Tomás Friseiro.
This happens a lot, especially when you're doing research with professors. I had to figure it out a lot on my own. Many professors have their favorites, and the rest of us end up feeling lost. You have to work twice as hard just to keep up, and that just makes everything feel even more competitive.
We also asked a professor about the challenges of advising students. Now you will hear from Geraldo.
The hardest part is when the student refuses to accept guidance without being able to justify or even explain why. They simply refuse. That's it, and that's it. I want to do it my way because I do. Often, this happens out of naivety or mere lack of knowledge. But some feel they are superior, not just to the advisor, but to all the established academic tradition. Finally, it's terrible when a student doesn't follow through on what was agreed upon, fails to submit what they were supposed to write, or submits it at the last minute. This is often accompanied by disappearing episodes, unanswered messages, or missing scheduled advising meetings. Some behave as though they have no commitment to the work they are supposed to be developing.
Now you will hear from Robson Cruz by the voice of Josué Olmedo. Robson is a psychology professor at PUC Minas and has been researching academic writing and life in the academy for about 2 decades.
On these questions of guidance, we can still put it in more macro-social terms. Today, more than ever, mentors face structural problems in the education of their mentees. A perception I have, which is also very recurrent, is that there is a Manichaean discourse. When we think about relationships between students and supervisors, how does this happen? This usually happens based on the idea of looking for who is to blame, as if the culprit were either the supervisor or the student. Not that there can't be people to blame in any working relationship, but this has reduced the problem. And, at the same time, as I said, you have the problem that we are not trained to be advisors. We are trained to be teachers, and so on. We could say that, in fact, we are trained to be teachers to some extent, because training to teach also has its limits. In fact, to put it another way, we are trained to be researchers. So we have little training, there is no obligation for us to have pedagogical mastery of the classroom, let alone of an interpersonal relationship as complex as the mentoring relationship.
And being an advisor is not an easy task. On one of those damn meme pages I mentioned, I've seen people sharing tutorials on how to fool your advisor. There was a post teaching people how to trick their advisor into thinking that they'd read the articles they were recommended, or to make it seem like they'd studied a topic more thoroughly in their writing when it wasn't well played. Can you believe it? The advisor or the advisee is a human being, just like anyone else. Some days the sky is blue, the birds are singing, and everything flows smoothly. But on other days, things will go wrong. Maybe you step into dog poop on the street. We need to learn to look at people, at others, with the same compassion that we need to learn to have for ourselves. Applying a loving logic to our actions, if it's difficult for me to walk the research path, isn't it also difficult for a professor to guide someone through this process? What can we do to help each other with this? We're not competing, we're building together. And what if we look at some stories that might inspire us to live differently in our relationships with professors, advisors, and mentees? We asked Beatriz what helped her relationship with her advisor.
Uma coisa que eu achei bem legal quando eu procurei a minha orientadora para o TCC.
You're listening to Her by Christine's voice.
One thing I think that was great when I approached my advisor for my thesis was that right from the start, when she saw my proposal, she pointed out what aspects of my topic she had a lot of knowledge in and what she wasn't so familiar with, which we would need to build together. Setting expectations was really important for organizing my research and planning to consult other people. Sincere dialogue has been truly important, not just for the research and deadlines, but also for mental health.
But what about the professors? How does this work for them? You will listen now to Geraldo Witese, professor in the Federal Institute of Goiás in Brazil. He has years of experience as an advisor.
First, it's important to listen to the student, understand what they would like to do and what they expect from the advising process. Second, it's essential to clearly outline what they can expect from me as their advisor, what I will do for them, and what I want. For instance, I can review texts and reports, pointing out corrections, but I won't write for them. Third, I'd like to discuss deadlines, establishing a reasonable schedule with room for breaks and some flexibility. Fourth, I try to make it clear what the limits of their autonomy are, which usually involves deadlines and the template of the reports and the written work they are responsible for. They need to know, for example, that their final report must be submitted by a certain date and follow academic standards, among other things. Finally, I aim to convey that not everything we plan will work out, and that's okay. Course corrections are natural. I also leave an open space for them to share their opinions and ideas, as all of this contributes to the development of their research. The environment must be supportive for mutual help and collaboration, ensuring that things flow as smoothly as possible, and that any bumps along the way are overcome.
An important skill that Geraldo mentioned, which is crucial for us to start maturing as researchers, is autonomy. Is it possible to conduct research autonomously? And how do we develop autonomy? Luana is going to share a bit about this based on her experience. You will hear by Ariana's voice.
So, I understand that autonomy comes from learning, right? From theoretical knowledge. It also comes from practical experience. In order to develop autonomy in research, you need to know the stages and processes. You also have to know about the empirical experience with research practices. Let me give you an example. You develop the autonomy to choose the chapter's bibliography when you understand the processes of selecting and studying theoretical texts. You get familiar with the field's concepts, you assess which ones connect to the question you're investigating and which ones don't, and then you begin to write about it. Autonomy doesn't arise from a single action, right? It follows a series of actions and steps, and we call it a process. All of this takes time and dedication, but it is not something hard to achieve. It is accessible to everyone. So being autonomous isn't a personality trait, or it is not something that some people have and some others don't. Autonomy in research is a skill that you can learn.
With this approach, we're also able to identify what both we and our research need most at the moment, helping us know where to focus our energy and who to reach out to. Just like anyone else, professors have different strengths and areas of knowledge. There's that professor who can help you more with a key concept in your research. Then there's another one who might be better at guiding you through the research organization and writing process. And there's also someone who has extensive experience with data analysis. I'm saying this because your advisor doesn't need to cover all these areas. You can reach out to other professors for help with a specific aspect of your research. Or if it's a more ongoing need, you could even find someone to co-supervise you in a co-tutoring arrangement. To learn, it's important to learn how to learn. Yes, the university, if we're open to it, is a vast field of learning how to learn and for dealing with what we don't yet know. Recognizing our own limits requires intellectual humility and curiosity. With each step in academy, we are developing an intellectual character, one that can be filled with toxicity and self-interest, or one that's geared toward our own well-being and that of our peers, our friends, our mentees, and mentors. If you've made it to university, chances are you're already a curious person, someone who isn't satisfied with shallow or ready-made answers. So apply that curiosity in other aspects of your life. If you're not sure how to enroll in a discipline that isn't part of your course, don't be afraid to ask. Don't close yourself off. This willingness to ask questions and hunger for understanding is curiosity in action. Ask questions, really. And to find the courage to ask, we must first accept that we have limitations and that we've stumbled a lot. Intellectual humility means admitting that we don't know it all. After all, acknowledging is the first step in any learning process. And you, professor, you won't be a poor mentor if you can't meet every need your student has. Recognize your own limits. Be open about them with your students. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we stopped seeing this as a weakness and instead as an honesty that actually makes us more humans and empathetic? And that could even help us ease our workload and create more collaborative spaces. After all, one thing we think could be important for the coordination is to create a practical introduction, with checklists, for example, detailing the number of hours students need to complete for each activity, because often this information is scattered across regulations, which can lead to confusion. It's also important to clearly outline details about the course itself and the internal possibilities for course changes. I've met people who have been studying mathematics for years in the hope of transferring internally to a medical course. This was the kind of thing I knew that had been prohibited by some internal regulation. Something similar sometimes happens with people who want to pursue a graduate degree and start taking courses as special subjects, thinking that they can count them towards the courses that they'll need to take when they enroll. There's usually a credit limit that can be transferred, and also an expiration period. Like credits can only be used within 2 years, for example. The obvious is only obvious when it's stated. So for you, the student, the rule is only valid when it's written down, meaning it's not enough to just hear from someone who thinks that that's the way and go along with it. Search it on the website, go to the administration office, save a copy of the regulation that says so, and confirm with the department. This kind of rule can even vary from program to program, university to university, and country to country. But you have to go after it because the university doesn't always make everything clear. Listen to what happened to Laura Bieber.
So I'm Laura, the one in the Homo Academicus team responsible for editing and distribution of the podcast. And I did graduate from a private university, and I did opted to pay it as a monthly tuition fee. But due to the sequence in which I completed my courses, by the final semester of my undergraduate program, this was back in 2018, the only course I had left to complete was the one related to my final thesis. And it was only close by the end of that semester, when I was nearing the end of my final tuition installments, that I learned during a conversation with my academic coordinator that I could have requested indeed a fee reduction at the beginning of that semester, given that I was indeed only enrolled in one course. However, since no one had informed me of that possibility earlier, I ended up paying the full tuition cost for my final semester while taking just that one class.
For the professors, something important to do is to understand the context of your students. Listen to what Sadie, who you have already heard in this episode, told us via Marcela's voice.
En Perú también es muy probable que
In Peru, it is also very likely that this happens with students who arrive in the capital, Lima, from other regions. I think it's important for professors to have a general understanding of where their students come from, so they don't assume that everyone is understanding everything. Often, the quality of education received is not the same for everyone, and because of this, some students need to work twice as hard to level their knowledge. At this point, professors can play a key role in helping these students.
For those of you in undergraduate studies, don't hesitate to ask questions at the secretary's office, the coordination office, or with the student organizations. It's not always easy to find welcoming people, but at least you learn more about how the university is organized, understand how the course is structured, and this will give you a better idea what to prioritize at each stage. And to know how to deal with each professor or subject, there's nothing like talking to your seniors. Really. These are people who will give you tips on how to study for each subject and what each professor is like. You can get closer to the senior students through extension projects, scientific initiation, or even during the breaks, striking up conversations in the cafeteria or in the line of the student dining hall. Maybe it's hard for you to approach someone to chat. We understand that. If that's the case, you can start making contact through WhatsApp groups. And little by little, you'll get to know your colleagues and find other ways to connect. And taking advantage of technology, try to find an online group for something you enjoy and identify with. Like sports club for those who like sports, or university organizations with strong political focus on something that's important to you, or study groups or religious groups, university choirs, etc. You name it. These are all great spaces to build lasting relationships or at least a support network for tough times. For those of you in graduate school, we know this can be a time full of fears and can also feel very lonely, but there are ways to ease this moment a little. When it comes to bureaucratic issues that can be really confusing, a great solution is to make friends with the staff in the secretary's office of your graduate program. The staff in the secretary's office is very knowledgeable and can help you with issues like where to resolve certain institutional matters, how the registration system works, when can you apply for an exchange program, and the steps to submit your qualification paper, among others. The sooner you seek out this information, the better. For me, making friends with the secretary that was in charge of getting all the paperwork ready for my thesis was so important when I was finishing my undergraduate studies. She's even on my thank you page in the thesis because everyone spoke of how hard it was to get everything ready and on time. And the fact that I was just able to get to know her a little bit more, be kind to her, explain my situation, and just befriend her made a huge difference in how much help I got in all the paperwork and getting everything on time through her help. Besides that, try to participate in events related to your field whenever you can. At these events, you'll meet people from different places and you'll be able to create discussion networks about research topics similar to yours and get insights into your own work. So that's it for today. And don't forget to visit our website to check out the resources we've left for you, along with the question sheet so we can have a great chat based on what we've discussed in this episode. On the website, you will also find contacts for online and in-person listening clubs for the podcast, for those who want to find more people to talk about these episodes.
You've been listening to Homo Academicus, hosted by Alejandro Ortiz, Spanish hosting by Esteban Muñoz, script and Portuguese hosting by Débora Vieira, script support by Robson Cruz, Ana Bezerra Felício, and Raquel Maia, resource support by Ana Bezerra Felício, Débora Vieira, Elisa Ferres, José Almeida, and Raquel Maia, script review by Frederico Lopes, media outreach by Elisa Ferres and Lorena Brondani, editing and distribution by Laura Bieber, graphic and web design by Amanda Lopes, English translation by Tomás Friseiro, Spanish translation by Débora Vieira. The Homo Academicus podcast is a project founded by the John Templeton Foundation and does not necessarily reflect on the Foundation's opinion. Visit the website at homoacademicus.org to learn more about us and find our resources.